the American people are selfish. And yes, Epstein is a real story. But those rooting so hard against Trump need a reality check. We begin tonight with Mark Halperin, editor-in-chief of Two Way, former ABC political director, author of Game Change, the book that inspired me to pursue a career in politics, still relevant for summer reading. Mark, you are wearing a coat and tie tonight for this serious occasion. Thank you for dressing up for us. I'm going to put up President Trump's response here on the screen. As the president just responded to the Wall Street Journal bombshell that wasn't, the president wrote on Truth Social, the editor of the Wall Street Journal, Emma Tucker, was told directly by Caroline Leavitt and by President Trump that the letter was fake. Instead, they are going with a false, malicious, defamatory story. Anyway, President Trump will be suing the Wall Street Journal, News Corp, and Mr. Murdoch shortly. Mark, do we need to consider the possibility that this was not actually written by Donald Trump?
Well, of course, people in our profession need to be open-minded about anything, and the Journal doesn't offer any proof. I'd be surprised if the Journal didn't have sources authenticating this. It'd be an awfully big risk, and the story is not written in a way that's particularly hedged. So just knowing, by reputation, Emma Tucker, knowing her from sources about her direct involvement with this, I'd be surprised if they didn't feel it was authentic. It's an interesting choice by the president to basically say it's fake when, for instance, Alan Dershowitz, who also is allegedly had a letter in there, but took a softer approach and said, basically, I don't remember anything like that. So I wonder if they've got documentation or if others might come forward. But again, we're talking about Donald Trump, attack the Pope, attack John McCain, Access Hollywood, et cetera. So although this story was built up in advance as something with new information, it certainly has new information. I'm not sure, even if somehow it's authenticated, I'm not sure that it's going to have any political impact on this particular president who has walked through a lot worse than this. Even
the headline, body language, and then you think about the language he used about Megyn Kelly. You think about the language of the Access Hollywood tape. I guess for all those hoping that this is going to somehow take down Donald Trump, do you agree, I think you do, that they're sorely mistaken? Thus, my question, why this obsessiveness with the Epstein files, and what is the danger to Democrats if Trump's right? There's a lot of people in here who are going to be very embarrassed by what's in these documents.
Well, so on the Democratic side, it's a little complicated. I'll get to it. I'll just say, I think the significance of the Journal story is if the letter's true, the president's lied about it. But more significantly, it speaks to a relationship which we still don't really understand. Still don't really understand the contours, to the extent these two guys were pals. This letter suggests a very intimate relationship, and that's, I think, the significance is it may cause other people to go look at that question. Not sure where that might lead, but there are a lot of unanswered questions there. I think the Democratic Party is simply jumping on this in an opportunistic way. It's something that's dividing the Republican Party. It's something that if you say you want more disclosure, you're on the side of young women and girls who were treated in a way that's monstrous. So there's a clear political opportunity there. Not one they took over the last 4 years. And there's also political risk because it's almost certain that some prominent Democrats would be caught up in whatever disclosure there was, and they would have to deal with the implications of that.
Yeah, I think about Bill Clinton, who certainly had a closer relationship with Jeffrey Epstein than Donald Trump did, at least in terms of the amount that we know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'd say based on what we know, I'm not sure that's true. It might be true, but Donald Trump, had a lot of contact with Jeffrey Epstein. We don't know how much, but I'm not sure we can say that Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was less close than Bill Clinton's. I just don't think we know right now.
What a play for you, what Donald Trump said coming off Marine One a couple of days ago. Take a listen.
These files were made up by Comey. They were made up by Obama. They were made up by the Biden. We've gone through years of it. But she's handled it very well, and it's going to be up to her. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release.
The whole what is she thinks is credible, I think, goes to what he knew, and the Wall Street Journal had talked to them into the White House about. But it brings up a different point about MAGA. MAGA has been very divided about this, or had been very divided about it, but I am seeing now MAGA coalesce because nothing coalesces MAGA more than Democrats in the media suddenly criticizing Donald Trump. And now they have someone to protect and fight against rather than each other.
Well, I'd add, maybe as the topper over even the media and the Democrats, is the invocation of the Comey name. Unexplained still is the firing of Comey's daughter as a federal prosecutor in New York. And you've heard the president invoke the Comey name there. I really do think Comey is, more than Hillary Clinton, more than Nancy Pelosi, more than Adam Schiff. Comey is just this huge, maybe even less than Fauci. Fauci might be more than Comey, but Comey's right up there. So the president, I tell people throughout this, don't think you know more about MAGA than Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump has a problem with MAGA, and there's no doubt this is a distinct problem, it may not be a ruinous one, but it's a distinct one. But don't think he's just going to sit back and guess about how he wants to deal with MAGA. And I think you're seeing in the rhetoric he uses, he's got a plan here to try to bring MAGA back on the side, including prominent people like these podcast and video podcast hosts who are normally lockstep with him, who, responding to their constituents, continue to raise questions about lack of disclosure.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk, who was somebody who was very outspoken about releasing the MAGA files and was there at Turning Point USA talking about it, he's now saying this is not how Trump talks at all. I don't believe it. I said at the top about how Trump is winning, and I think the culture of America is changing. Part of the culture of America, what for better or for worse, is scandals like this or something even that sort of was so shocking to America, like the Access Hollywood tape, now seems sort of tame in comparison to what we deal with. Now this letter, if real, would have been shocking when you started covering politics or even when I started covering politics, and now it's just not that shocking in of itself or disqualifying. Stephen Colbert, late night at CBS, was just canceled. 2026 will be his last show. The ratings versus his salary probably explains a lot of that. But are we at the point now, Mark, where kind of almost nothing matters? As Trump says, I can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose a supporter.
Well, because of digital technology, stuff that would matter before for anyone can and sometimes does matter less. Donald Trump and Bill Clinton are unique in the pantheon here. They walk through things that other people couldn't walk through. And I don't think we fully understand. There's some tactical things we do understand. There's some things about the people around them, the aggressiveness of the pushback. But there's an ineffable quality to Trump and Clinton that makes them different. And so I don't think the blanket statement is as true as the specific statement, which is this guy can walk through stuff that would kill anyone else politically. And it's not like everybody can say, well, I'll just go with the Trump playbook and do the same thing. There's something about him that allows him to fight through. I understand it. I'll say it modestly. I think I understand it as well or almost as well as anyone, and I don't understand it.
I think we were all continually almost surprised by it, even people who've spent time trying to understand it. Mark, always good to see you. Thank you for wearing the coat and tie tonight. We appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
I come as I am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.